Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Get comfortable, grab a drink, and tell me in the comments what city you're listening from, because the story you're about to hear starts with my wife throwing her wedding ring at my chest and walking out into the night, and it ends with her realizing that one fun night can cost you a whole life. Now, have you ever had that split second where your entire world flips? Like a switch? That was me last Friday night, sitting on the couch in our place in Riverside Heights with the TV remote in my hand. Dinner finished, thinking I was about to have a quiet evening, when the front door slammed open and Kendra came in like a storm looking for something to break, and the first thing she said wasn't, "Hi," or "How was your day?" It was, "We need to talk." As she dropped her purse so hard the coffee table rattled. I muted the TV and looked up, because you can hear a bomb before you see the crater, and I asked, "About what?" And she started pacing with her hands on her hips, eyes sharp, familiar, but hotter than I'd ever seen them, and she said, "About this, about us, about how I'm suffocating in this house, in this marriage, in this life you built." And I remember the way my stomach tightened, not because I was scared of an argument, but because I could hear how practiced it sounded, like she'd rehearsed it in the car, and I kept my voice calm and asked her where this was coming from, and she repeated it louder like volume could turn feelings into facts. "I feel trapped. I got married too young. I missed everything. My friends are out there living, being free, and I'm here every night playing house with you." And I stood up slowly, still trying to keep the air in the room from catching fire, and I said, "Playing house? We've been married almost 4 years. This is our life." And she snapped back, "This is your life, your routine, your schedule, your little rules about how a wife should act. I never got to be young and wild. I never got to feel what it's like to be single and free." And right there I knew exactly what script I was trapped inside, because I'd heard it from guys at work, from friends who got blindsided, the sudden dissatisfaction, the speech about missing out, the hunger for freedom, the way it's always framed like the marriage is a cage instead of a choice. So I crossed my arms and asked her straight, "So what are you actually saying?" And she stopped pacing and faced me like she'd been waiting for that line, and she said, "I need space. I need to go out and remember who I am without you hovering over me like some controlling, possessive freak." And I couldn't help it. I laughed once, short and bitter, and I said, "Controlling because I want to spend nights with my wife?" And she fired back, "Yes, you track my every move. You question where I go. You guilt me for wanting to have fun with my friends. I'm done." And I said, "I ask where you're going because I care, Kendra. And the only time I've ever had a problem with your friends is when you roll in drunk at 2 in the morning on a work night." And she threw her hands up like I'd proven her point. "See? There it is again. The judgment, the rules, the control." And she got louder with every word until she was practically shouting, "I'm 27 and I feel like I live with my father, not my husband." And I said something I shouldn't have said, something sharp, something that landed like a match. "Maybe it's because you act like a teenager instead of a married woman?" And her face went red instantly. She stepped toward me, eyes blazing, and she hissed, "A married woman? You mean your property? Someone who exists to cook your dinner, clean your house, and be available whenever you want?" And I told her that's not what I meant, and she said, "It is what you meant. I'm done pretending I'm someone I'm not. I'm done living under your rules, your schedule, your expectations." And then she reached for her left hand, and I felt that hollow drop in my stomach because I knew what was coming before she even started twisting the ring. And she said, "You want to know what I think about your precious marriage?" And she slid the ring off and held it between us like a weapon. "I think it's a joke. We rushed into this because we were young and stupid, and now I'm paying for it." And then, like she wanted it to hurt, she threw it at my chest hard enough that it actually stung when it hit me, and the sound of metal bouncing on the wood floor and rolling under the coffee table filled the room with this ugly silence. And she grabbed her purse and announced, "I'm going out. I'm going to have the fun I should have had instead of playing house with you. Don't wait up." And I said, "If you walk out that door right now, we're going to have a serious problem." And she turned with a smile that looked like poison, and she said, "Good. Maybe it's time we do." And the door slammed so hard the windows trembled. I stood there staring at the spot where my ring ended up under the table, and something in me went cold, not sad, not pleading, not panicked cold, because she thought she was teaching me a lesson. She thought she'd go out, make me worry, come back, and find me softened up and ready to give her whatever freedom she demanded. And she had no idea what she just started. I crouched, picked up the ring, rolled it in my palm, and all I could think was how easy it was for her to treat almost 4 years like trash, like our vows were trash, like I was trash, and I realized she was right about one thing. It was time for both of us to remember who we really were, because she was about to get a brutal reminder of the kind of man she married, and I was about to prove that some lines, once crossed, don't get erased. For nearly 2 hours, I sat there in a chair staring at that ring on the coffee table, replaying her tone, her face, the way she threw it, and the disrespect felt too deliberate to be just emotions. It felt like a test, like she was pushing to see how much ground she could take, and at 10:17 p.m., I decided I wasn't going to guess, I was going to know, so I called her, and it rang 4 times before she answered, and the moment she did I could tell she was drunk because the background hit me first loud music, yelling, that packed club echo, and she slurred, "What do you want?" And I said, "I want to know where you are and when you're coming home." And she laughed, a nasty laugh. "Home? That's funny. You still think you can tell me what to do?" And I said, "I'm not telling you. I'm asking my wife when she plans to come back to our house." And the music dipped like she stepped away from the crowd, and she said, "Your wife is dead. She died tonight when she finally realized what a controlling, boring, pathetic excuse of a man she married." And my jaw clenched, but I kept my voice steady and asked if she was drunk. And she said, "Yes, and it feels amazing. I feel alive for the first time in years. I'm surrounded by real men who know how to have fun, who know how to treat a woman like she's worth something." And there it was, that deliberate jab, and I said, "So this is the plan? Get wasted and let other guys buy you drinks to prove a point?" And she snapped, "It's not about proving anything. It's about finally living my life. Tonight is my night. Tonight is the night I remember what it feels like to be young, free, and wanted by men who actually have something to offer." And I asked what they had to offer that I didn't, and she practically screamed into the phone, "Confidence. Excitement. They make me feel like a woman instead of a housemate you keep locked in your boring little world." And I could hear male voices closer now, someone talking to her giggling like she was 16, and I said, "Are you done embarrassing yourself?" And she purred, "Embarrassing myself, babe? The night is just starting. This girl's night, and I'm going to enjoy it. I'll dance with whoever I want, drink whatever I want, do whatever makes me feel good." And I asked her what she thought that would accomplish, and she said, "It'll prove I don't need your permission. It'll prove other men find me attractive and exciting, even if you take me for granted." And then her voice shifted, colder, crueler, and she said, "You know what? I'm done talking to you. I'm done explaining myself to someone who couldn't handle a real woman if his life depended on it. If you hang up, what, you're gonna come here and humiliate yourself? Please, stay home and think about what you did wrong." And she hung up. I stared at my phone for a long second and set it down next to the ring, and what shocked me was my hands were steady. My mind felt clear, like the fog had burned off, because now I understood exactly what she thought she was doing to me, and 5 minutes later my phone buzzed with a text. I opened it and my blood went cold again because it was a photo of her sitting on a muscular guy's lap, his arms around her waist, her staring straight at the camera with this smug, provocative grin, and there were at least 3 more men crowding in, shirts open or tight, the type of club guys who make a living collecting attention from drunk women, and the message was 2 words, "Miss anything?" And I didn't reply with rage. I didn't reply with begging. I walked into the kitchen, opened the junk drawer, and pulled out a small voice recorder I usually kept for work meetings, because I wasn't going to fight feelings with feelings. I was going to fight feelings with facts. I called her again and she answered on the first ring like she was waiting for me to crack, and she laughed. "See something you like?" And I said, "I see a married woman making choices she's going to regret." And she said, "The only thing I regret is wasting years with someone who doesn't appreciate what he has. These men appreciate me more than you ever did. They tell me I'm beautiful. They tell me I'm fun. They treat me like I'm special instead of an obligation." And I hit record and asked her, "So what exactly are you planning to do?" And she said it like she wanted to cut me with it. "Go home with one of them. Maybe I finally see what I've been missing all these years. Maybe I remember what it's like to be with a real man who knows how to make a woman feel alive while I'm still married to you." And she laughed again. "That ring is probably still on your floor, right where it belongs. As far as I'm concerned, I'm single tonight. Tomorrow I'll decide if I want to keep being single or if you learned your lesson. And I stopped the recording, saved it, then took screenshots of her text and the photo, making sure the timestamp showed clearly, and she said, "You still there?" And I said, "I'm here." And she said, "Good. Think about what you're losing tonight. Think about how easy it would have been to just give me the freedom I asked for instead of being so insecure and small." And she hung up again. I sat there for a moment staring at the evidence like it was a set of keys, because now I had everything I needed to show who was actually destroying this marriage, and I pulled up the number for my attorney, Miles Harper, a friend from college who built his whole career on one rule: document everything, move fast, and don't let emotion hijack your brain. And when he answered, half awake and annoyed, I said, "Miles, I need you to hear something." And I sent him the screenshots, played him the recording, explained the situation in clean, factual terms, and when I finished he asked how long this had been going on, and I told him this was the first time it went this far. But there had been signs, complaints about being trapped, nights out, coming home drunk, constant pressure testing, and he said, "Not a phase. Escalation. The good news is you documented it perfectly. The bad news is you need to act tonight, not tomorrow." And I asked what he meant, and he said, "She's coming home expecting you to be broken and desperate. Instead, she needs to meet consequences, real ones." And he asked, "How attached is she to her things?" And I looked around the bedroom we'd shared for years, her side of the closet packed, the bathroom counter covered, her presence everywhere, and I said, "Very." And he said, "Then start packing. Everything that belongs to her needs to be out of the house before she gets back." And I hesitated and said it felt extreme, and he said, "Extreme is throwing a wedding ring at your husband and sending photos from a club with other men. You're not escalating. You're responding. She wants games. Show her you don't play. You end them." And while he started drafting paperwork, I started moving, load after load, clothes, shoes, makeup bags, jewelry boxes, books, the little decorations she insisted we buy, anything that marked the place as ours. And I piled it on the front lawn, and with every trip I felt calmer, more locked in, like the decision was setting into concrete. And when I finished he said, "Now change the locks tonight." And I went to the tool drawer and found a smart lock I'd bought months ago but never installed, one of those weekend projects that always gets pushed. And I installed it right then, set a code only I knew, tested it twice, then went to the garage and disabled the automatic opener so if she wanted in, she'd have to knock. And I wasn't done because I walked through the house and stripped her access everywhere: her spare key spot, her entry codes, anything that gave her silent entry. And by around 2:10 a.m. the house looked like a single guy lived there again, clean, organized, and stripped of her little vanilla candles and matching throw pillows. And I stood in the living room staring out at the heap on the lawn, and I knew some of it was expensive, but money wasn't the point anymore. Respect was the point. Consequences were the point. My phone buzzed with another text from her, "Hope you're thinking about me." And I screenshot it and forwarded it to Miles with a note that said, "More evidence." Then I replied, "I am." And she answered instantly, "Good. Maybe now you'll appreciate what you have." And I stared at that message because she still didn't understand it was already past tense. I went to bed, and for the first time in months the bed felt quiet and roomy. No complaints about the temperature. No blanket tug of war. And while I drifted off, my phone kept vibrating with more messages I didn't open because I didn't need more proof. She'd already handed me enough. I woke up around 6:05 a.m. to the sound of rain, steady and cold. And when I looked out the bedroom window, her things were soaked, designer dresses and expensive shoes getting hammered by weather like the universe was adding its own punctuation. And I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table and checked my phone for the first time since late night. 17 missed calls, a pile of texts that went from smug to angry to worried, and the last one sent around 3:12 a.m. read, "Why aren't you answering? Are you okay?" And all I could think was too little, too late. At 7:20 Miles called and asked how I slept, and I said better than I had in months, and he said, "Good. Paperwork is ready. Don't negotiate. Don't explain. Direct her to me." And I asked what if she tried to force her way in, and he said, "You documented her abandoning the home and declaring herself single. She chose to walk out. That matters?" And around 8:45 I heard a car pull into the driveway and saw her sitting behind the wheel of her silver sedan, staring at the soaked pile like she couldn't process it, and she stayed there for almost 2 full minutes before getting out, looking wrecked, makeup smeared, dress wrinkled, hair like it hadn't met a brush since yesterday, and she tried the garage remote first. Nothing. Then she went to the front door and tried her key, and when it didn't work, she started pounding. Open the door. Open it now. Her voice hoarse like she'd been yelling over the club all night. And I walked to the door but didn't open it, and I said, "We can talk through the door?" And she snapped, "Through the door? Are you insane? Let me in. This is my house too." And I said, "Not anymore. You threw your ring at me and declared yourself single. Single people don't live here." And she stuttered, "That was just," and I cut in, "You sat on another man's lap and told me you were going to see what you'd been missing with a real man. What part of that wasn't literal?" And she went quiet, then said, "My stuff is getting ruined out here." And I said, "That tends to happen when you abandon it." And she said, "I didn't abandon anything. I went out for one night." And I said, "You went out after discarding our marriage and threatening adultery." And she tried the handle again, then kicked the door. "You can't do this. You can't lock me out." And I said, "I can, and I did. You have 10 minutes to grab what's on the lawn before I call and report the rest as abandoned property." And she started crying then, big dramatic sobs that would have worked on me yesterday, but today they sounded like a performance. And she pleaded, "Please, I was drunk. I was stupid. I didn't mean it. I love you. I love our marriage." And I said, "You tried to make me jealous by sitting on another man's lap." And she said, "Yes, I wanted you to see what you could lose." And I said, "Mission accomplished. I saw exactly what I could lose and decided I'm better without it." And she cried harder, saying we could do therapy, counseling, whatever, and I said, "There's nothing to fix. You made your choice when you walked out. Again when you sent that photo. Again when you said you might go home with someone." And she said, "But I didn't. I came home to you." And I said, "You came home to pick up your things and see if I learned my lesson." And through the window I watched her sink onto the front steps in that wrinkled club dress, surrounded by soaked belongings, looking small and lost, and she whispered, "What do you want me to do?" And I said, "Call my lawyer and work out the divorce." And the word divorce hit her like a slap, and she said, "You can't end almost 4 years over one mistake." And I said, "I'm not the one who threw anything away. You did?" And she gathered wet clothes with shaking arms, stuffing them into the car, and before she got in she turned and tried one last threat. "You'll regret this when you're alone every night." And I opened the door just enough to look her in the eyes and said, "The only thing I regret is not doing it sooner." And she drove off without another word, leaving a chunk of her stuff still on the lawn, and I called a donation pickup for what remained because someone else could use what she decided didn't matter. 3 days passed in total silence. No calls, no texts, no dramatic drive-bys, and I almost thought she'd accepted reality, until Thursday afternoon she showed up again looking different, clean, composed, conservative dress, like she'd planned this new version of herself in the mirror, and she spoke through the door. "I know you don't want to see me, but I need 5 minutes," and against my better judgment I opened the door but stayed in the doorway and said, "You have 3. And she told me she'd been staying with her sister. She'd had time to think. She admitted she was wrong, called it unforgivable, and said she never actually did anything with those men. She insisted it was just a mistake fueled by alcohol and pain. She said she felt invisible in our routine, like roommates, and she cried and promised she'd do anything, counseling, therapy, deleting social media, cutting off those friends, anything to prove she was committed. And I listened, because I'm not a monster, but underneath her tears I could still see that entitlement, that belief she deserved a reset button after she lit the match. So I asked her what happens in 6 months when she feels trapped again, when she decides she's been punished long enough, and she went quiet and said it wouldn't happen, and I said, "It happened once. That's enough." And she tried to twist the knife with a hypothetical. "What if I told you I was pregnant?" And I stared at her and said, "Don't try to manipulate me with imaginary children." And she begged, ugly crying now, promising she'd spend the rest of her life making it up to me. And I told her she couldn't even make it through one night without betraying what we built, and when she pressed her hand on the door and asked what she could do to fix it, I looked at her one last time and said, "Learn from it. Become someone who doesn't destroy good things when she's bored. Find someone willing to tolerate your games." And she said, "I don't want anyone else. I want you." And I said, You had me. You threw me away. And I locked the door while she cried outside for a while before finally leaving. The next morning Miles called and told me she'd hired her own attorney and they were going to contest everything, demand half the house, half the retirement, monthly support, paint me as controlling and claim I overreacted to one bad night, and I told him to let them try and he said, "We'll show the night." And he did screenshots, timestamps, her messages, the photo, her own recorded words, declaring herself single and threatening to go home with someone, and about 7 weeks later it was over, because once the evidence hit the table her story collapsed fast. The judge listened with that tired expression of someone who's seen the same drama 1,000 times, and when her lawyer argued she was drunk and emotional, the judge asked why that excused her choices but not mine, and when they tried the controlling husband angle, Miles played the clip where she admitted she was trying to make me jealous by sitting on a man's lap, and when they suggested reconciliation, the judge asked why she didn't pursue counseling before she declared the marriage over and walked out. The final outcome was brutal for her: no house, no retirement money, no monthly support, just her personal belongings and her car, because the court viewed her actions as voluntary abandonment and public rejection of the marriage, and I watched her face shift from confidence to disbelief to that slow realization that her one night of freedom cost her everything we built. And outside the courthouse she asked me with mascara streaking down her cheeks, "Are you happy now? Did you destroy my life over a stupid mistake?" And I told her the truth. I didn't destroy anything. You did. And she insisted she never would have actually cheated. And I asked how I was supposed to know that without reading her mind. And she had no answer, so I said, "You know what's funny? If you'd come to me and said you felt unappreciated, if you'd asked for excitement, I would have listened. We could have worked on it. But you didn't fight for us. You tested me, humiliated me, and blamed me for your choices." And her sister pulled her away, calling me heartless, and maybe I was in their story, but in my story I learned something important. I'm not the kind of man who accepts disrespect just to avoid being alone, and I'm not the kind of man who rewards manipulation with forgiveness. A few months later, I ran into one of her friends at a grocery store. She told me Kendra was dating a new guy she met at a different club, and I honestly shrugged. Good for her, she got the freedom and excitement she wanted. And as for me, my house was peaceful, my finances were stable, and I'd started dating again, nothing serious yet, but I was meeting women who didn't treat commitment like a game you pause when you get bored. And when people ask if I regret how hard I went, I always say the same thing. I regret marrying someone who thought love was conditional on getting her way. I regret ignoring the warning signs, but I don't regret standing up for myself when she crossed the line, because to me marriage isn't built on endless second chances no matter what. It's built on respect, and once respect is gone, everything else is just pretending. If you made it to the end, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what city you're listening from, because I've got another story coming that will make your jaw drop, and I'll see you in the next one.